What's up, everybody? I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to our Hurricane Outlook and Discussion for Sunday, today, June 12th, 2022. As of course, we always have a few things to talk about, especially that it's hurricane season, and there are also stuff that are beginning to uptrend in both the Pacific and the Atlantic, too. We'll look at those in just a minute. Plus, of course, just a daily dose of climatology. I guess we'll look at a brief tweet from Alex Borham much later on. But first of all, just want to welcome you in on today's discussion. Of course, as always, like and subscribe to really help us grow the channel, and also share with family and friends too. It would really appreciate it. I would really appreciate it myself, because that would mean that you're helping me to grow the channel, and that's something that I really would appreciate too, because that would help me eventually down the line. We'll be able to get more resources and better tools to help us track the tropics, which is what I'm here to do. All right, without further ado, let's get started today. Nothing on the Atlantic, 48-hour expectance. We're not expecting anything to form within the next 48 hours. However, for once now, finally, actually, or depending on how you say it, we are actually, we can't say the same for the 5 day, because there is something that we are expecting, and this is actually just a recent development. As of today, models have started to pick up at something developing here around the South Caribbean and moving roughly northwestward, either getting very close or coming close to Central America, maybe impacting a little bit, then getting into bay, the Bay of the Gulf of Honduras, not the Bay of Honduras, sorry, but the Gulf of Honduras, where we might see some more development, and then models longer term after that then bring this into the Bay of Campeche. But it nonetheless is something that we are watching, because a lot of models were not hinting at this yesterday, but they're just starting to pick up on it today. And the reason why, as well, models are really going on the storm is because it's expected to start forming within the 5 day period. So that's why the National Hurricane Center mentioned it. They have a 0% chance within the next 48 hours, hence why we don't see anything on the 48-hour time page. But of course, within the next 5 days, 20% chance of development. Not too high now, but of course, as time goes on, we'll see how they do increase, and we'll see, of course, if this does amount to anything. But as I do mention, this is within the climatology favored area for tropical cyclone development, which is usually in this area and in the Gulf of Mexico and the Western Caribbean this time in June. So it's not too unexpected if we do get something to develop here, but nonetheless something we'll be watching very closely, and especially that it's approaching closer in time too. East Pacific is also very active. We have this storm out here, 92E. We'll talk about that in a little bit more in depth. It's increased in shower and thunderstorm activity today, getting a little more organized. We have a 90% chance of development in the next 5 days. So basically, the National Hurricane Center is now certain that this will try to become something in the next 5 days. So of course, that'll mean we need to watch something here too. And I'm not sure if this popped up yesterday. I forgot if this popped up yesterday or today, but we also have something else there down by Central America as well. This seems like on the both sides of Central America now we have stuff to talk about. This might be another thing that might try to form within the next couple of days as it remains southwest of the coast of Nicaragua. Gradual development from the National Hurricane Center is expected. All right, quickly to 92E, the satellite imagery. They talked about a rapid increase in showers and thunderstorms, so that might mean this is trying to organize itself a center, which of course, when it does that, we know that this is on its way to starting to become a tropical cyclone. And of course, that's what we see here. Lots of deep convection being very persistent over 92E. So of course, that definitely does mean that this is certainly trying to do something, and the National Hurricane Center is very certain on it. The tracks yesterday, a lot of them had this meandering off the coast of Mexico, then maybe coming close. Now this is a little bit more likely. As of today, at least, the model guidance seems to be a little bit more, or I should say a lot more in agreement, actually. Just remember the guidance from yesterday, all of them had them anywhere from coming into Mexico here to here. Now they all keep us off the coast of Mexico, so that's good news for Mexico. However, of course, the risk will still be for rip currents and, of course, all those things that we usually see when storms stay off the coast, but of course, they will still bring impacts. no matter what. But of course, we'll watch to see if we have any other development besides that. All right. Besides that, let's take a look at how the Atlantic in general and how the general Western Hemisphere looks. And we do see basically a lot of convection, even here with the tropical waves, pretty active stream of tropical waves coming off Africa. That area in the Western Caribbean, I think this is something around here. It has to do with the ITCZ, which does lay in here. And of course, this much bigger, large scale pattern that we do see across the general Western Hemisphere. And that's why we're seeing all this activity, the AOI here, 92E, which is over here, and then another area down here too. And besides that, accompanying it with a lot of convection around, of course, that just really does set up the general idea that there's a general favorable pattern in the atmosphere, as we did talk about the NJO that's moving through, and it will eventually come west enough to favor Atlantic activity. Well, we're already starting to see that. And of course, the NJO that came in and left the fertilizing ground basically, and it's still there though in the East Pack, and that's where we're seeing all the activity that we are seeing now. Now we see it in the Atlantic too, and this is just a very big part of the general pattern that we do see a favorable Atlantic right now. And of course, we're expected to last out the season, but at least for now, it's very much there. And then we also do see, just side notes, some stuff off the East Coast, a front that's moving by. Then there's a trough over the Great Lakes, and then you can see there's some mesoscale activity that is right now centered over the central Midwestern United States. And this is actually expected to dip southward, eventually emerge off the southeast coast. And a few days ago, there was some talk that this might emerge off the southeast coast to the point where it might actually emerge over the warmer waters of the southeast coast and maybe have a chance to develop. Doesn't look like too much now, but other than that, we do actually have, besides that, a real main threat to watch here, and that is that area down here in the Atlantic. And of course, as just emphasizing before, this is all just associated, all this big convection. Of course, it wouldn't be supported without rising air in the atmosphere, and that's what we have here, the MJO filtered VP200, which is basically velocity potential, so the atmosphere energy potential to spin up vorticity clumps and of course develop into tropical cyclones. You can see here represented in the green when I'm talking about that MJO. It's favorable over the Atlantic. It's situated there, and it's definitely favorable, allowing for all the convection too, and also in the East Pacific as well. The general Western Hemisphere is favored this time, and then of course not as much in the East Hemisphere, the Pacific and the Indian Ocean. That of course we see. We have these oranges and these reds here, which is all associated, of course, with sinking air, and that would mean that we won't have as much convection and we'll have a little bit less of a favorable atmosphere there. So of course we're not seeing a lot of activity here, but of course where that blues are, that does favor where the atmosphere is favorable right now. Then if we go out in time, just over the next 2 weeks, it basically does last. The Eastern Hemisphere will start to get favored a little bit more as we get over time, and then as we see that MJO propagate westward, starts to encompass the Eastern Pacific, but over Africa at least, where that's the main point of the Atlantic, it does stick around for a decent amount of time, and eventually we'll go a little bit more to depth of that as the next 2 weeks go. We'll start to get a little bit more interesting to see, especially when it comes to July activity. That'll be interesting. But once again, just emphasizing this area in the Atlantic. The GFS, I guess, was only the only model that was really hinting at this until we start seeing the European, and this is roughly around hour 168. They already have this all in the Bay of Campeche, but I think we'll need to go back to where they do have this developed. We do notice it's associated with the general low pressure area that's right now over the Southern Caribbean. This is already by 72 hours out. 96 hours, we already have this developing, and then by 120 hours, we see it moving into the Bay of the Gulf of Honduras, and then it moves into the Bay of Campeche. And I guess the main reason why a lot of models are starting to hint at this developing is because I did see talks about a ridge kind of to the north that was expected to keep this further south. It's now starting to seem like it'll kind of be chipped off from a trough that's off the East Coast right now, which is very evident if we go back to this. We see this huge trough off the East Coast, a huge cold front, and then there's a ridge to the west, which is why we barely see any cloud cover at all, because there's a lot of high pressure. Apparently, what this is supposed to do is help a little bit when it comes to the steering, help this a little bit in the way of avoiding Central America a little more. And that's why we have a lot of ensembles that take this into the Gulf of Honduras and the Western Caribbean and give us a better chance to try to develop. And of course, because of the generally favorable atmosphere, we're seeing that occur. And if we take a look at the GFS, it generally does that same idea. Around 72 hours, we start seeing something kind of consolidate. Then in the Western Caribbean, 96 hours to 102. And then by the time we get to 120 hours out, this is just north of Honduras and in the Bay of Campeche, developing into sort of system. Of course, the GFS has its bias when it comes to intensity, so this really shows it becoming a very strong storm, which is not very likely at all, especially given the time of year it is. But the general idea remains the same. The ridge to the north is kind of chipped away. This does get driven into the Yucatan, and then if we go out to 240 hours out, this is already done and into the Bay of Campeche, but the general idea is there that we might see something develop soon. And if we go towards the European too, they also have some sort of indication. You see around 72 hours out, something developing in the Southern Caribbean in 96 hours. And of course, the European, if we talk about that, they have a little bit more of a bias towards having a stronger ridge, but it is definitely one thing when we start seeing that even with a bias towards a strong ridge, it hints at potential for the storm to kind of develop a little bit as it moves into Nicaragua. Does, once again, because they have a stronger ridge, they kind of keep us a little bit more further south, but noticeable vorticity. And then this tries to move into the Bay of Campeche, where it does seem to consolidate a little more. Not, of course, as organized as the GFS. The GFS is very aggressive on this, but it's still a signal there nonetheless, and a much, much marked improvement when it comes to a signal and picking up something possibly developing, especially if this started really upticking today, which is something we'll need to watch for, and why, of course, the NHC tagged this today, I assume, because we're really starting to see a bunch of models jump on this today too. And we take a look at the CMTs too, just really quickly. They even also have a system that tries to develop a little bit further later on, but the same general idea in the Western Caribbean. Then this moves into the Bay of Campeche, a little bit less organized. Of course, none of the models are as organized as the GFS. It's the most aggressive model on this, but nonetheless, still picking up on this, and we have a general consensus with a lot of the models that we might indeed get something, which is why the NHC has this tagged. Alright, so now I'm going to mention really quickly Alex Borham. He did mention that despite strong trade winds in the MDR, it has actually warmed up a little in the past week. And if we take a look at this little map here that he showed, the anomalies were before in the MDR just at 1.5 degrees, 0.15 degrees Celsius above normal. Now we're above 0.2 degrees Celsius above normal. And he does notice that from the beginning of June towards now, we're starting to getting a little bit more of a defined above normal water band in the MDR that stretches from South America to Africa. And of course, this will be interesting to see how this evolves, because if we start getting more concentrated energy to develop in the MDR, especially, as I did mention before, the subtropics, which are pretty cool, and are at its coolest stage in years, basically. If we start to get a lot more consolidated energy in the deep tropics, it's all a matter of the Hadley cell, which basically means when we have rising motion here in the deep tropics, we start seeing sinking air in return in the subtropics. And especially when it comes to an active year, that really, the development over the deep tropics, energy focus there is most important, because that's where we see the most development. And especially that we have the La Nina and everything else to the African monsoon in favor. All we really need is the MDR to warm up more, and the subtropics pool to persist, which basically does seem like it's likely to. And then what will I tell you? We have a really good setup for the Atlantic this year, and it just really looks overall like a very active year for the Atlantic. And as you did see on my forecast several weeks ago, I reflect that a lot, and it really does look likely that the Atlantic will have a very active time this year. And of course, Dealin did mention here on his tweet that the 850 millibar vector wind this year, as for at least the last couple of days, as into support of the warming of the MDR. You notice that there's not too much in terms of zonal wind noise across the MDR, which would definitely, in general, mean that there will be a supportive for less strong zonal winds across the MDR, which would help not stir up the waters as much and in favor the warming that Alex is mentioning. So I mean, it just really depends on how much this persists, though, because if this persists in a while and we do see the MDR really begin to warm up and the subtropics pool persists, then that, mark my words, that'll be a very big signal for this year, and it'll add on even more to the signal that we're already seeing that is in favor to help favor the Atlantic to be, if you ask me, in a pretty active setup for this year. But of course, we'll see how things evolve, and we'll see if we do get more favorable as time goes on. But it's just a matter of a waiting game. We're still in June. We have a long ways to still go to August, and a lot could change, and we could still see a lot develop that would favor the peak and the Atlantic hurricane season in general even more than it already is now. But with that being said, that's going to close it off for this discussion. Of course, we have something to watch in the Atlantic and the Eastern Pacific, so of course we'll be back for tomorrow discussion. Like, subscribe, comment what you thought about the video, and of course as well, subscribe, turn the post notifications on so you can get the discussions as soon as I post them. It would really help to share and just spread the word about the channel, and subscribing to, especially, it's free on your end, and you can subscribe whenever, you can unsubscribe whenever you want to. But I would really appreciate it, and I would really personally appreciate it if you subscribe to help the channel. But with that being said, peace, love, and kindness to all. Have a great rest of the weekend, and we'll talk again tomorrow for tomorrow's video discussion. See you.